How's it going, you guys? So it's it's May 12th, just right after the election, and I feel like a lot of people who don't really get politics know what's going on, and that's kind of like me, like I'm not too big into politics, and I don't really know what's going on, and there's a lot of things that we need clarity on, and anyways, that's what we're here for today. My name is Cedar Parker with Sacred Trust. I'm from Tsleil-Waututh, Seattle. I'm just an average person. I love my family 100%. I'm a family person till the end. Family first, and then money. No, I'm just kidding. But that's what Christy Clark likes to say. No, but family first, like I said, and we're here to get more clarity on what's happening with the elections, what's going on right now, what's going on in the next couple months or whatnot. So yeah. What's your name? So this is I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Hey, how's it going? My name's Ben. I also work with Sacred Trust, and I have been around politics a lot in my life, and happy to talk about what's going on right now. It's a really interesting election, actually. Even if you're not into politics, this is a really bizarre moment in British Columbia. What's happened here has not happened in decades, and may actually even be unprecedented in some ways. In terms of the role of the Green Party, in terms of this minority government. I'm happy to answer some questions and try to explain basically what's going on.
All right, so with Christy Clark winning and all these things happening right now, what's going on right now this minute? What are the plans like for the average person who doesn't really know what's going on? For even the people who don't know politics at all, what's happening right now, May 12th.
Well, I guess the first place to start is did Christy Clark win? Because technically she's got a minority government right now, and basically what that means is to get basically you need enough votes to pass any vote in the legislature, right? And the number of votes that you need to succeed if you're trying to get a vote passed is 44, and right now she has 43. So basically, for her to be able to actually get anything done in the BC legislature, she needs at least 44 votes, which means she needs at least one vote from the Green Party. And there's a big question mark about whether the Green Party will support her. It's possible that that she won't be able to be the government at all. But even before we get to the part where there's any votes in the legislature, the thing that's kind of crazy that's happening right now is something like 10% of the votes still haven't been counted. Because of the way the system works in BC, there's all these absentee ballots that could be as much as 100,000 votes or something. I've heard between 50,000 or 100,000 and 50. So that's a big chunk of the votes, and there's about 6 ridings in BC that were within hundreds of votes. There's actually one on the island that's only 9 votes difference between the Liberals and the NDP. Right now that's an NDP riding, but if it flipped to the Liberals and everything else remained the same, they'd actually have 44 seats, which means they'd have just barely a majority government. But that means anytime that they had a vote on anything, every single person who's part of that government needs to show up.
Are they still counting votes right now?
Right now there's no votes being counted until they do the count of the absentee ballots, which for some crazy reason is 2 weeks from now. So for the next 2 weeks, we haven't got a clue who the government is. And right now, basically all we know is the election results as of a couple of nights ago, when they did the initial vote count. But because it's so close, we're actually kind of in limbo right now.
So is there going to be a recount?
There's also some recounts happening because some of the I've done a bunch of interviews with him in the past.
That's crazy.
He ran for the BC Liberal Party, and they actually called the riding for him earlier in the night. And then for anybody who was watching by close to midnight, they were saying, actually, we've seen all the results come in now, and it's within 300 votes. Who knows? So that could be the case in Coquitlam-Millardville. It could be the case in this riding in Richmond. It could be the case even for Vancouver, False Creek, Sam Sullivan's riding, which was flipping back and forth. There's the potential for a bunch of different recounts. There's also the potential for the absentee ballots to change things. But to kind of answer the question of who won the election, I think I read an article by a guy named Vaughn Palmer, who's one of the kind of guys who writes about politics in BC the most for the Vancouver Province, Vancouver Sun. And Vaughn Palmer wrote a piece that said it's not clear who won, but it's clear that Christy Clark lost. which I actually think was like the best summary of what's going on in the election. Because the reality is that like even if she won by a slim margin, like basically her days are numbered. Like, you know, it's unclear whether her government would last for like a whole 4 years. Even if she just having 44 seats, there's a couple things people need to understand. And I'm going to get a little bit geeky here, but bear with me.
You're gonna geek out.
I'm gonna geek out a little bit. I'll be wigging out over here if you need me. So there's one thing that people need to understand. You got 44 seats in the legislature, which is basically half the legislature, right?
Yeah, let's simplify this right here.
Yeah, or to put it in American terms, if any Americans are watching, that'd basically be the equivalent to like the Congress, say, or like a state legislature, right? So the provincial legislature, right? You need to have more than half of the seats to be the government, and right now neither party has more than half. To have half, you need to have 44, right? But there's one thing that people forget a lot of the time, which is you need a Speaker of the House. Basically the chairperson. Right?
For any party?
Well, basically the way it works is the legislature picks the chairperson. There's a vote. So whoever has enough votes can pick who the chairperson is.
All right, so let's just slow this down for the viewers right now. So
yeah.
Let's simplify it to like, let's slow this down a little bit. Let's say that again. Let's go through that again.
Okay, so to have a majority of the seats in the legislature, you need 44.
All right, 44.
Right, but that's how many votes you need to be able to win on any piece of legislation that you want to get votes for.
Yeah.
But you have to appoint a chairperson, right? So and that chairperson is really important. They get to decide all kinds of things inside of the legislature. Like they get to tell people when they can talk. They actually even play a role in deciding like what pieces of legislation come forward and when and how it's debated, and they really set the tone and the terms of how things happen. And if the Liberals under Christy Clark, who really aren't liberal, they're more like conservatives, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
it's confusing. But long story short, if Christy Clark's party has 44 seats, let's say that vote, the recount that's happening or the absentee ballots on the island, if let's say they get to 44 without having the Green Party, they'd still need to appoint a Speaker of the House, a chairperson, which means that either they appoint somebody from their own party, and then they'd only have 43 seats, so they're not in a majority anymore, or they have to appoint somebody from another party. So they could try to appoint, say, one of the Green Party representatives to be the Speaker of the House, but then they lose a fair amount of control because another party is now running the show inside the Parliament, or inside the legislature, even though they're actually the government. So long story short is, even if they get to 44, even if they win this seat on the island that has been a big topic of conversation right now, because there's only 9 votes that separate these two candidates.
So that's the biggest, like that's the big factor right now, the 9 votes.
Yeah, it could really come down to the 9 votes and what happens with those absentee ballots.
And just so people know, what part of the island is it?
Southern Vancouver Island. So way down. Let's see, we actually even have the writings on the map here, don't we?
Yeah, we actually have it here.
So, where is it? Is it that one? I think it's that writing right there.
What is it? CWV?
Yeah, does anybody remember the name of the writing?
Cowichan Valley.
Cowichan Valley, yeah. Yeah, there you go. Cowichan Valley, CWV.
Right here, Cowichan Valley.
Yeah.
Right out of Victoria, huh?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Or the Cowie Valley, as some people call it. So, I mean, basically, Southern Vancouver Island is, critical to understand for this election, because that's where the Greens won 3 seats, basically all Southern Vancouver seats, and the Cowichan Valley riding, that one was so close with the Greens, the Liberals, and the NDP that it came down to a 9-vote difference between those different candidates. So if anybody ever tells you that your vote doesn't matter, literally 9 votes.
Yeah, it matters.
Small personal note, I once lost an election by 9 votes, so I know exactly how that feels. It's, when you work your butt off for months, years even, and it comes down to that, every vote really does make a difference. And there's a bunch of ridings that were super close. That just happens to be the closest one. And small little interesting piece of this, the candidate for the Liberal Party is a military commander, and a bunch of the absentee ballots are actually people from the military. So there's a question about whether that means this guy's going to get all those votes because these people are all military, or maybe he wasn't super popular. Maybe the fact that they know him doesn't actually help him. So there's a lot of conversation going on right now about that. And this one riding seems really, really important. But the reason I'm bringing up this whole Speaker of the House thing is because I think it's important for people to understand that even if they get 44 votes, that doesn't mean, even if they get those 44 seats, that doesn't mean they got total control. And all it would take is like one of those people, like one of the Liberals deciding that they don't like Christy Clark, or maybe they get sick and they don't show up on that day, or they get in a car accident, or who knows what happens, you know. Like, literally every single one of those members of the legislature needs to be locked down, solid, on side. And there's plenty of people, I bet, within Christy Clark's government who don't like her, who maybe want to get her out. Like, all it takes is one person deciding. So every member of that government has a tremendous amount of influence.
There's a lot of factors in this.
There really is. It's complicated, man.
A lot of big things going on.
So I guess the question then is, like, what does this all really mean? Like, so, I mean, you know, let's say at the end of the month, we could have, there's basically 3 different outcomes that we could have, maybe even 4. You could have a majority government for the Liberals. You could have a majority government for the NDP, right? Because either one of them, let's say all 6 of those ridings that are close, let's say all of them went to the NDP or all of them went to the Liberals, right? Like, so you could actually have one or the other of these governments having more than 44, right? And they actually get to form government. Still really close, still really hard to hold on to that. But, you know, the flip side of that is, like, what is the case right now is we've got a minority government, which means that, like, there isn't 44 seats for anybody. The Green Party has 3. So the Green Party basically gets to decide who the government is. The Green Party, you know, this small little party with 3 people elected, who up until the last election had never elected anybody. They elected one person in the last election.
No, 33.
Yeah, I got involved in the Green Party way too early. I was involved 10 years ago. You know, and it's worth pointing out that the Greens in Canada now have a federally elected MP, Elizabeth May. They have 3 people in the BC legislature. They have 1 in the Vancouver City Council. And, like, the mayor of Victoria is somebody who's a member of the Green Party. There's a whole bunch of Greens getting elected. Yeah, it's true. And I think it says a lot about how much people care about the environment. Like, outside of all the other issues about, you know, Green and NDP and what they really mean, and the people, there's all kinds of debates about whether the Green Party's left-wing or right-wing or whatever. To me, what it really just says is people care a lot about the environment, you know, especially here in British Columbia. And, you know, it's worth pointing out, too, that, like, yeah, Christy Clark might have more seats in the legislature by 1 at the moment, but if you actually look at the popular vote, 56% of people in this province voted for a party other than Christy Clark's party. 56% of people in this province voted for parties that oppose the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Like, there's more people sitting in government right now in BC who oppose Kinder Morgan than support it. So, I mean, like, it's looking bad for Kinder Morgan right now. Like, it's looking like they've got more opposition than support in the government. Mm-hmm. So a lot depends on what happens with that, with the count that's happening at the end of this month. But, you know, my guess is things stay pretty much the same. And it'll be really hard, I think, for the Green Party to do anything other than support the NDP. Like, they're in negotiations right now. But, like, you know, if you voted for the Green Party, you're probably opposed to Kinder Morgan. If you voted for the Green Party, you're probably opposed to LNG, liquefied natural gas. If you voted for the Green Party, you're probably opposed to the Site C Dam, right? Like, and those are all things that the Liberal Party is hardcore in favor of, right? So I think a lot of Greens would be pretty pissed off if the Green Party didn't go work with the NDP. You know, the NDP might not have, you know, the perfect position on every issue for Greens, but they're definitely a lot closer to the position of the average Green than the Liberal Party is. You know, the NDP was opposed to the Kinder Morgan pipeline, you know, would oppose a bunch of the LNG projects that people don't like, although they might support some of them. And they're very open to, you know, talking about whether the Site C Dam should go ahead. You know, so all of these things are, like, very much on the table again. And for anybody who's, like, concerned about Kinder Morgan, like, you might be upset seeing this election result right now and thinking, like, oh, well, you know, the Liberals won another government. But the truth is that, like, the days are numbered for this government. Like, the most likely thing that'll happen, from my perspective, if the number of seats remains the same, is that they'll try to bring forward a speech from the throne, which is basically where they set out the agenda for the province for the next year, and the Green Party won't support it. I think it would be really, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'd have a really hard time imagining them supporting a speech from the throne that doesn't support the things that they're calling for.
What exactly does a speech from the throne mean? So
a speech from the throne, okay, so here in Canada, it's crazy, actually. Like, so instead of having a governor...
Just like a simplify it.
Yeah, I'll simplify it. So, I mean, basically, the Queen is still the head of government in Canada. It's like so every piece of legislation that gets passed, like you know how when the Congress passes a piece of legislation, then the Senate votes on it, and then it goes to the president to sign. In Canada, what happens is it goes through the Parliament, and then it goes to the Governor General to sign. The Governor General is the representative of the Queen. And largely their role is like ceremonial, like they don't usually make change, like it's not like with Donald Trump where he decides to veto a bill or whatever. Like usually the Governor General just signs everything because that's just what they're supposed to do. But in moments like this where you've got a minority government, like they actually become super important because in BC the lieutenant governor is actually the one who's going to decide who the premier is.
All right.
So like let's say so the reason why it's called a speech from the throne is what happens is the lieutenant governor actually is handed a speech, like a letter that's written by the premier that says this is the priorities for the province for the next year. And then the lieutenant governor actually sits on like a throne, like a big, crazy looking seat in the legislature, and actually reads this speech out saying this is the agenda for the province of BC that's been presented to me, and me as the the top dog in the province, the lieutenant governor, here's the agenda for the province. And then that speech gets voted on by the members of the legislature. So let's say that speech comes out and all the NDP and Greens vote against it. That means that they no longer have the consent to govern. Like they don't have enough votes to move forward with their agenda. So what would happen at that point is that the NDP, hopefully with the support of the Green Party, would go to the lieutenant governor and make a case for them becoming the government. And if there's one other weird thing that could happen, if there's actually an equal number of seats between the NDP and the Liberals, the NDP and the Greens could actually go to the lieutenant governor even before they start actually going back to the legislature and say, we represent the majority of members of the legislature, we should form a government. You should, and really it's up to the lieutenant governor. Like the lieutenant governor right now basically gets to decide who the premier of British Columbia is. And it largely just comes down to like who approaches them and says what to them. The tradition is in a minority situation like this, that the people who were the government before get a chance to try to continue to be the government.
Okay.
But if the Greens decide they will not support the Liberals and they will support the NDP, then the most likely scenario, I think, is that they become a coalition government, like where the Greens and the NDP are together.
Yeah, let's get into the scenarios, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So like, just for the people of BC and who are for standing up against Kinder Morgan, who are for the environment, life, I guess, or again, I don't want to say against, but like are standing up against Science C. Like, what's the best case scenario for people who are for Kinder Morgan? You know what I mean? Like, what's the best case scenario for the province and standing up against against these companies who are not even from Canada?
Yeah.
So what's the best case scenario with what's going on with the elections right now?
So Houston-based Kinder Morgan. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. Yes. Not even Canadian.
So there's a few different things, but I mean right now a bunch of groups like Lead Now are actually calling on people to reach out to the Green Party, the newly elected Green Party MLAs, members of the legislature, and asking them to form a government with the NDP. So, I mean, given that they represent the majority of people between those two parties, about 60% of the population voted for one or the other of those two parties, the idea is like, talk to those Greens and say, look, cooperate for the sake of the province, and I think that makes a certain amount of sense. Like, they are the majority of people. They, had pretty similar positions on a bunch of issues. Makes sense that, and I'd say most people, whether they voted NDP or they voted Green, they wanted change. They didn't want more of the same government with the Greens helping. The Greens are probably going to, like, play it with their cards pretty close to their chest, though. Because they want to have good bargaining position with the NDP. So I think they're trying to show that they're willing to work with either government. And there is some truth to some people who voted for the Greens may never want the NDP to be in power. Like, there are some people who like the Greens but don't like the NDP.
Yeah, for sure. So,
but, I mean, to answer your question about kind of best case scenario.
Or, like, what's some good scenarios that, that we could all get on board about? What are some things people can do? Or, what's the positivity factor of this right now?
Well,
the good factor.
I think the good factor is clearly people called for change. Clearly an overwhelming majority of people want change. And I'd say a lot of people voting for the Green Party Whatever you think about the NDP and the Greens just shows that like people want something different. Like people are not happy with the status quo. People want to see change. And I think there's a lot of similarities with that and like Bernie Sanders votes in the United States, even Donald Trump in a weird way. Like as much as it's misguided, I think a lot of people wanted something outside of the system, outside of the status quo, something that represented change. Like some people say voting for Donald Trump was like throwing a grenade in Washington. I don't know if it's a particularly constructive way to make change, but like some people who are just pissed off wanted to see change, and they saw that as a way of making it happen. I can leave the strategy of that to another time, but so I think
next week.
Next week's episode will be about that. But yeah, I mean, long story short, like people want to change, and I think that's a good thing. And overwhelmingly, people voted for parties that oppose Kinder Morgan. So if you're opposed to Kinder Morgan, that's a good thing. And if you really don't like this current government, like people who really understand politics in BC, like Vaughn Palmer. Or like I said before, like Vaughn Palmer said, like it's unclear who won the election, but Christy Clark lost, right? So I mean,
unclear. All right.
Yeah, I mean, like basically, even if the BC Liberals won, her control of that party is probably diminishing, and the people who'd like to see her go and somebody else become the leader, who might have a different position or might do different things, like so that like her role as the premier her days seem to be numbered as premier. And so if you didn't like her government, I think that's a good sign. But that in the bigger picture, like that longer sort of story about Kinder Morgan, like I think truth be told, like no matter who wins, we're still going to have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Right, because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau still is pushing for this project to go forward, and the Alberta Premier Rachel Notley still is pushing for this project to move forward. And like I think really regardless who wins, in some ways it's business as usual. Like even if the Liberals have a majority government, like Tsleil-Waututh Nation has an active court case against Kinder Morgan, right? Like and against the federal government's approval of Kinder Morgan. There's also court cases from the city of Vancouver, from the Squamish Nation, from others that are targeting the provincial government. And frankly, that was what stopped the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline, was those provincial court cases.
Sounds like this is a people's movement.
Really is. Sounds
like this is the decision of the people.
Yeah.
It really does sound like that.
Yeah.
Like the people want this, not the companies,
Yeah.
And the politicians. That people want, real change. No, I'm not talking about the things that you see on the billboards or whatnot. I think this is a people's movement. This is something to get behind. This
comes from the grassroots, no doubt.
Yeah, comes from the heart.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's worth pointing out that like there's a tremendous amount of risk for investors too. That's the other thing right now that's happening is Kinder Morgan needs to raise about half the money to actually build this project.
Yeah.
It's like $1.7 billion, which is not peanuts. It's a lot of money. And they, from what I take from the fact that they're doing what's called an IPO, like they're putting their shares on the stock market.
Yeah.
And what they've what that tells me.
I heard the investments are going down. I heard that. I actually have it right here on my computer. The investments in $1 million in the following industries, you get this many jobs. And for natural gas, it's 5. Mm-hmm. But then you go down to wind turbine, it's 13. Then you go down to solar, it's 14.
Yeah.
So that's almost 3 times more.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And then for biomass, that's 16. So knowing these things, what does that mean for BC? That you think like with this elections?
Well, I mean,
I think that they're like you think that the politicians are somewhat really going backwards.
Well, I mean, to sort of speak to the job creation thing you're talking about, like what that says to me is like there's more jobs per dollar invested if you invest in solar and wind and biomass and rapid transit, things like that. Mm-hmm. Like if we really want to get serious about talking about jobs, right, and a way forward for everybody, like what to me is that there's like a win-win scenario here. Like you can say no to Kinder Morgan and say yes to good jobs. In fact, better jobs, like because they're jobs that can't be exported overseas. They're jobs that don't mean poisoning people and poisoning the environment. They're jobs we can all feel good about, and a lot of them are good paying union jobs, right? Like they're the kind of jobs that the NDP can get behind, that anybody should be able to get behind, right? Because they provide good jobs for people and their families, right? Of course, there's like this larger conversation about jobs in Alberta and how that all plays out. That's another conversation. But I mean, the reality is that per dollar invested, there's actually more jobs in the alternatives than there is in the status quo, and people need to understand that.
Yeah.
And for the investors, right? Like for the people who are thinking about investing in this pipeline project, like this is an important moment for them to be paying attention because Kinder Morgan's going and looking for investors right now.
Yeah. Do you maybe think that sometimes like Christy Clark is ignoring this fact?
I think too often we just kind of go back to these old ideas like oil equals money. Like it's hard to convince people that like an oil pipeline isn't the route to wealth. But the reality is that the world has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, 10 years, like, and we're moving in a direction where change is like not only necessary for the environment, but it's also like actually just better for jobs. Like put it this way, like if you can like manufacture solar panels, but you have to go look for oil further and further offshore, deeper and deeper underground, further and further into the oil sands, right? Like like you're actually hunting for oil, and whereas you could just be manufacturing energy. Like you can make solar panels in a plant, right? And the more of them you make, the lower the price is, right? Like because your cost per unit goes down the more you manufacture. And that's what's happening, right? Like that's why the price of solar has gone down so much, is because we're mass manufacturing it. So I mean, I think it's just a little too easy to kind of respond to the capital investment that comes from these big companies like Kinder Morgan, instead of having a vision and a strategy and like really pushing for change to happen.
Yeah, and I actually have a statistic on that about how much it's been going down. Like the price of solar panels. Like for example, in 1977, like for silicon PV cells in US dollars per watt, it was $76 back in 1977, and then we go to 2015. That's 30 cents.
That's
so
crazy.
$76 down to 30 cents.
Yeah.
So the world really is changing just since 1977 when my dad was young.
I was born that year.
Yeah, to where my dad was just a kid, 7 years old.
Yeah.
Down to 2015 where I was about 18 years old. So yeah, that's just in that change when my dad was young too, when I was young. It's changing dramatically, and I think that like
and even in the last 5 years, like that price has gone from like $4 or $5 down to like 30 cents.
Wow.
Like I mean, the prices dropped dramatically in a very short period of time, to the point where like solar is actually cost competitive with natural gas in a lot of places, like let alone oil.
Yeah. So to all the people out there who get their statistics from the news, because there's a thing out there called yellow media, where sometimes big companies put money into the media. Like for example, this is public. Kinder Morgan said that they paid some of the news companies up here to go in favor with Kinder Morgan. What would you say to the people who are watching the news like that? Would you say like get your own, do your own research or whatnot, or like reach out? Because there's a lot of people out there who say, well, it's for jobs, like I saw it on the news yesterday. It's for jobs, and they say, well, this and that, and then they're saying it's the no factor that this is really, really good, So like, there's a lot of people out there who watch yellow news, you know what I mean? Like these companies come in and then they pay out the news to go in favor with them. It's actually public, they come out in public with this. What would you say to the people who are doing that? Like, what are things that they can do, Because a lot of people out there just really get their facts from the news, where the news these days are in favor of companies.
Even if you watch the news. I mean, a lot of people don't even watch the news,
Yeah, or even get their information from whatnot, like sources like that.
I mean, I guess there's a few different things I'd say. Like, I wouldn't paint all of the media as, like, corrupt or negative. Like, I mean, put it this way. I used to be on a show on global TV every, week or two, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd say the stuff I was saying was good. And I mean, there are reporters that I have a lot of respect for, who are out there, who work for various news outlets, who do good work. But
yeah, well, let's just say like the big news, like I don't know, say CNN or whatever Fox is to Canada.
I mean, I'd say just like take everything with a grain of salt. Like no matter what source you're hearing it from, whether you're hearing it from me or you're hearing it from like Wolf Blitzer. Like there's a lot of different sources of information out there. And I mean, I think the thing that's become really complicated in today's world is like there's so much like fake news and spin, and like to really make sure that you're finding the real facts. Like, because the reality is that like everybody's got a right to their own opinion, but nobody has the right to their own facts. Like the facts are something that we should all be able to agree on, and then interpreting what they mean or what to do about them is a whole other story. But like right now, even just what a fact is has become like hard to really be clear about, right?
Yeah. So
like, I think one thing is just like try to really figure out what the facts are. And there's always good like academic resources out there. Like, it's not that hard to find. Like just doing a little bit of Googling around. Like if you're, really into it, you can even look at like the peer-reviewed research on pretty much any topic. You can find all of that on Google, right? Like, but like at least just trying to find the different sides of the story. Like if you're hearing some fact that doesn't really sit right with you, try to make sure you're looking for the other piece of information.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I mean, and specifically on Kinder Morgan, like I would urge people to like read the assessment report that the Tsleil-Waututh Nation put forward. Like this was a like.
Where can they find that?
It's on the Tsleil-Waututh website, twnSacredTrust.ca.
Or say that again.
twnSacredTrust.ca.
There we go.
And you could even make sure there's a link in the comments on the bottom of this video directly to where you can find that report.
Sweet.
But like that report was actually, I think, a more detailed assessment of the Kinder Morgan proposal than the one that was done by the National Energy Board under the federal government. Like there was a number of different experts that were hired to really look in detail at the concerns that Tsleil-Waututh Nation had. I was really impressed with this document, I got to say. Like, I mean, this was like, I mean, the way I've heard, Charlene Alec and others describe it is like, basically it was taking what was understood from traditional knowledge and then putting like Western science behind it, like really understanding like the risk to the inlet, the risk to the birds, the risk to the fish, to the orcas, to the habitat, to human beings. Like a lot of that is kind of obvious, right? Like an oil spill, it would be a problem. But like to really then take that and say, okay, well, exactly how much of a problem and how many people could be affected, and like doing the modeling to actually show if there was a spill, where would it go, and who,
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic right there.
It is.
We can talk about that tomorrow.
We could, and I mean, honestly, like within that assessment report, like it was, about a 1,500-page document or something. But then there was like hundreds of pages of these appendices, like going into like all the different detail. And then there's supplementary reports that were put together that like updated the information based on the price of oil, that looked at the economics and whether it made sense economically for, we actually, brought in some like big named economists to do an analysis of the economic research. Like, long story short is like, there is a tremendous amount of peer reviewed research that went into this that like, I don't even think was fully taken into consideration by the federal government. It's definitely the sort of thing that people should understand. And one of the things that the communications team here at Sacred Trust has done has been like trying to take apart that assessment report and just turn it into like little bite-sized bits. So I mean, another way you can do this is you can just go and look on the TWN Sacred Trust website. There's a thing that just says Kinder Morgan Concerns, and then it's got a whole bunch of different things like, looking at like the impact on orcas, the impact on salmon, the impact on birds, impact on people, health impacts, economics. It's all in there. And like,
it affects everything.
And instead of having to read through the whole document, you can just see these little snippets. And one of the other things that we're going to be doing in the next little while is actually doing more interviews with some of the people behind these reports, some of the people out there who have specific concerns in specific areas.
Yeah, and we're going to start doing interviews about almost every other day. We're going to start doing interviews with just certain people, telling them the facts and see how they feel. Like, for example, go up to any mother, any student, and telling them the facts, the facts that we took on, that we followed with our heart, that we did, like the facts that we know that are real. And that's why we're fighting, that's why we're fighting for this. And, we're going to start talking to people, so stay tuned on Sacred Trust, keep on following us or whatnot, stay tuned so you can hear the story of us standing up and stopping Kinder Morgan, coming together to fight for, like I said, my goddaughter or whatnot. I'm doing this to fight for my goddaughter. I'm doing this to fight for my little 7-year-old brother, so that we could swim in this inlet, so we could keep British Columbia beautiful, like on the license plates. I think that's what we're doing in the very end, because it's a war on information. Because I think if everybody knew whatever, you know what I mean, what I don't want to say what I knew, but even what all the people in Sacred Trust knew, it would look a lot different. Because the truth is, there can be an oil spill, but what if an explosion happens? What if a fire happens in there? It's a bomb. It literally is a bomb down there. Like all these oil plants are bombs. They're bombs. If it sparks up, it's a bomb.
Yeah,
it's crazy, and it would devastate.
It's true. It's scary. I mean, one of the people I'm hoping we'll be able to interview soon is the fire chief from Burnaby, who's got these specific concerns about the storage tank facility. Like right on Burnaby Mountain, right close to SFU. I mean, this is one of the things that people really need to know about is like the risk from that. So stay tuned for more information about that. Yeah. Also, there's this interview we did just recently with this guy who worked in the oil industry for like 50 years in Alberta, who has a lot to say about the sort of what you're talking about in terms of the risk of explosions and other kind of issues that need to be considered. I guess one other thing I'll say to anybody who's watching too is like, if you have specific questions, like if there's things you want to know or there's things you think need to be talked about that aren't being talked about enough, like, the beauty of these these videos on social media is this can be a two-way conversation. Like, send your comments, send your questions, and we can take that and try to like find the answers to your questions or respond to your comments. Let's make sure this is like, not just us talking to you, but you tell us what you think needs to be said. Your feedback's really helpful.
And on that bombshell, can you give us kind of a recap of like not about the government and what's going on right
Sure.
now. Just a short recap. You know, tell us with a bang.
Yeah.
Tell us, you know, maybe tell us what's happening right now and tell us what we can do. Maybe does that sound kind of good?
Yeah.
Or whatever you want to put in there
no,
to
fair.
transition it.
Yeah.
All right.
So I mean, real simple thing. Like basically, right now we don't know who the government is in BC.
Mm-hmm.
It's too close to call. Like right now, the Liberals have one more seat than the NDP. The Greens have 3 seats. Nobody's got a majority. There's a count of all these absentee ballots that's happening at the end of the month. You know, so that's a big moment. But like what people can do right now, I mean, one of the things people can do is if they would like to see a coalition government or cooperation between the NDP and the Greens, overwhelming majority of people in the province voted for change. There are groups like Lead Now, who, and we could always post a link in the comments. If people want to reach out to the Greens and ask them to work with the NDP, or reach out to the NDP and ask them to work with the Greens, you can do that. By all means, you could also reach out to your Liberal MLA and say you're not happy about where things are at right now. You know, so like communicating with the people that recently just got elected, I think is something worth doing. I would encourage anybody, you know, personally, if you want to do something right now, that's something you can do. But, you know, regardless of what happens, I'd say, like, just signing up to, like, get updates from Sacred Trust. Like, because, you know, really at the end of the day, like you were saying, like, it's, you know, it's people's movements that make the difference, right? Like, people need to get involved. People need to, like, you know, make their voice heard. They need to reach out to everybody else. Like, one of the number one things you can do, really, is just, like, learning more about this and educating other people about it. Information's critical. You know, definitely as this continues to unfold, like, we will update people about what happens when that recount happens, you know, talk about the implications of it. There's also this Pull Together campaign that's ongoing, right? Like, because there are these active lawsuits, and probably regardless of the outcome of the election, like, that is going to continue to move forward. There will be these lawsuits, and they're expensive, and, like, financial support makes a big difference. So, like, you know, one thing anybody can do right now is, like, either donate to the Pull Together campaign or help to organize a Pull Together event. You know, do your own fundraising. Like, even if you don't have money to donate yourself, you can always invite people over for a dinner and raise a little bit of money, or you can organize an event. That's one of the really cool things that's happening with the Pull Together campaign, actually, is, like, all these, like, grassroots people, like, you know, for example, there was, like, artists who wanted to raise money, or there was, like, a fashion show to raise money. There's a group of comedians who did a show to raise money. You know, there's a guy, a traveling musician who did concerts.
Coffee places, even down in Seattle, Portland, all over the West Coast, and even the world. You know, people see this everywhere, and they want to get on board. You know? Everywhere you see this, you know, they see the heart, they see what's really happening, because, you know, people, maybe the Liberals think that we have more than one world, you know?
Maybe.
Maybe they think that we could just use it all up, but, you know, the reality is we can't. You know, you go light years away from Earth, and you see the world and how really small it is, you know, and you see how precious the world is, and you see everybody, and you look at everybody you love and see how precious it is, and that the world is also just as precious, you know. This is the only place where we could live, you know. We haven't mastered, you know, space. You know, we can't go fly out into space and find a new place. You know, we have to stay here. And maybe Liberals, those people think that we only have one space, but this is us right here in Vancouver. And, you know, everywhere around the world, people are dying to stand up against these companies. But no, right here, right now, I think is the time to stand up. You know, it's the time to look at our family and say, what are we going to do for our future? What are we going to do for the young ones, you know? And even weirder, what are we going to do for us so it doesn't happen to us right here? And I think that's the biggest thing right there, is that, you know, you got to get this information. It's a war on information, you know. If we all knew that the struggle of, you know, from 30 to 400 tankers coming through here, that's destructive and crazy. And that's, you know, I feel as if that even Christy Clark has tendencies of a psychopath, because psychopaths do something and they don't care of the outcome. And how do you feel about having a person just like that as your leader? You know, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely appalling. You know, psychopaths have those tendencies of not caring about what they're doing after they do it. And how do you feel about having somebody like that do this? You know, and Christy Clark knows the information too, what's going on, but it's good for the economy. You know, it's good for this, it's good for that. Where no, you know, you look at solar panels. You look at renewable energy and you see how many more jobs compared to the extraction of oil is going to favor. And the craziest part is that this company is based out of Houston. So all the money goes to people in Houston and goes to the United States. It's not for Canada. It's not for the Canadians. You know what I mean? And when the pipeline is finished building, where do all those jobs go, you know? a big part of this is going to bulldozing down all the forests, bulldozing everything that's in the way, bulldozing down all these places where these animals live, and even where people live, because it goes through major routes, because it goes through major cities and major places where people live in British Columbia. And then through that process, it's devastating, you know. It's devastating. Yeah, it's crazy, you know. How is this going to happen? You know, we all have to come together, you know. It's just...
That's actually one of the things we're going to do a little bit in the near future, too, is taking you to some of the places where the pipeline route is actually proposed, just so you can see some of the people's homes and farms and schools and places where this goes. You know, the aquifers that the pipeline comes real close to, the water that's threatened, the, you know, important places. Because, like you're saying, we're talking about the most densely populated parts of the province where this pipeline's going. You know, which not only means, like, direct impact on people's homes, but a whole bunch of risk for people who live in the nearby area, too.
So it goes through Kamloops, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically it goes diagonally across the province from Edmonton to Burnaby.
And I heard it actually goes through some schools and hospitals?
There's a whole bunch of schools that the existing pipeline goes right under or really close to, and many of those schools will have the new pipeline, if it's allowed to go through, you know, really close to it as well.
And I heard some of these schools, like these students who go to school there, you know what I mean? I heard these students are doing some things too, right?
Yeah, there's a whole movement of students trying to oppose this, like at, you know, the high school level and in colleges. I mean, probably the group of students that, of all of the different impacts, I'm actually probably the most worried about SFU, frankly. I mean, you know, there's that storage tank facility right on the mountain there.
Oh yeah,
you know, only crazy. One real way to come and go from there. You know, and that storage tank facility is like real dangerous. Like the fire chief of Burnaby, like, you know, not some activist or something, is like, you know, speaking out against this at town hall meetings and stuff. Like, you know, there's a reason why the city of Burnaby is opposed to this. Exactly. And the city of Vancouver, and the city of North Vancouver, and West Vancouver, and, you know, the list goes on. Like, this isn't just about environmentalists or, you know, First Nations activists or activists. So this is like everybody. Everybody's got this problem. You know, so
that's why I'm into this. I by no means look like a hippie. But, you know, anybody can get behind a good cause.
I just checked my clothes to see if I look like a hippie. All right. Well, I mean, I think, long story short, we don't really know exactly who won this election, but I think, to summarize what Vaughn Palmer said, it looks like Christy Clark lost it. Definitely a majority calling for change, you know, but we still got a lot of work to do. I think we just got to leave it there. That's where we're at. You know, encourage you to get involved. Please post your comments, your feedback, and we'll talk again soon.
We'll put some links in the description so that you can follow us, you know, follow what we're doing, and get ready for a lot more of these interactions on Facebook Live, on the videos. We have YouTube, so, you know, get ready for a lot more of this, and, yeah, peace out.
Right on.